Welcome back to Just Another Solar Podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, Karl Jensen. G'day, mate.
Freezing in Melbourne, Luke. Glad you asked about the weather.
Yeah, I think it's 30 degrees and sunny here in Perth, so there you go. And
if we hit 14 today, mate, I'd be surprised.
Oh, Christ. And we've got industry legend, of course, Nigel Morris. G'day, mate.
G'day, mate. G'day, Karl. You're not going to want to know where I'm sitting. I'm sitting at the Cruising Yacht Club in Adelaide. You can see the yachts in the background. It's been a spectacular Adelaide day. I'm loving being here, actually. It's great.
It seems that almost every time that we've called in recently, you're at a bar somewhere after an industry event with a beautiful background. So no exception today.
31 years, mate. You'd think I should have learnt how to do this right after 31 years. I reckon I've kind of got it nailed. Yeah.
It's almost like the rock star of the solar industry. You're going on tour. You need to check the back of the guitar to see which city you're in.
I think it's more like one of those old leeches that you just can't pull off the side of your leg, mate. Just won't go away.
Very good, mate. And do you have any takeaways from the SIA event or Adelaide more generally?
Oh, look, another fantastic event, sold out again, which has been great. We were in Melbourne last week for Solar Cutters, which was a great little event. And Kathleen took the mantle for solar analytics at Solar Cutters in Sydney yesterday, which is another good little event. But actually, I do have a good takeaway because I was chatting with an installer today. He was actually from Victoria. We had a few Victorian installers come over actually for this event, which is a great sign. And I was chatting with him, and he was explaining to me that he tends to focus on the sort of upper end, the premium segment. It dips down to mid, but generally sells premium solar. And said, look, I'd rather do a smaller number of jobs, but build in some good margin. Have the ability to service my customers, sell quality product that I'm happy with. And he said, interestingly, I've got a buddy who went, you're mad. You got to go cheap, mate. You got to go cheap. You got to sell cheap. And his buddy who's selling cheap solar is dying. He's dying because he is just competing against all the bottom end stuff. He gets lots of leads, but it's all compared on price, and he can't convert them. And so, even though he's at the bottom end of the market, he's not winning. And his mate who's selling all premium and doing a much, much lower volume, he's making money on his jobs. He's happy with what he's doing. And the customers who come to him, he very quickly works out whether they want to stick with him or whether they want to go by a budget system. And so he gets rid of them. So it was just a great example of how, you don't have to sell cheap to win.
There's an interesting topic that came out, and the thing that really brought it to our attention was some pictures that came up online around recycling panels. And we saw some CDTE, so some thin film panels, which have a cadmium and heavy metals with their frames knocked off and sitting broken in a yard somewhere.
Actually, Luke, on that, were they CDT or were they first solar?
It showed the compliance plate, first solar CDTE panels. So anyway, one of the other things you said, Nigel, was you had a chat in Adelaide to someone about the issues with recycling.
I did. I met I won't say who they are, but a quite a notable company in Adelaide doing solar, and they were talking about some of the challenges they'd faced actually of embedding recycling into their process. They were really, really keen from a sort of a corporate brand identity perspective to make sure that customers felt comfortable with that. And so I had the sort of one of their corporate people and then one of the people who organises or manages their operational stuff. And they said, from a corporate perspective, it was a great initiative. It was really really positive for the corporate branding. But listening to the fellow who had to actually make it work, when they were pulling old panels off on old systems and trying to arrange the recycling, it was actually the administration and the logistics and, how do they actually get those panels off the roof and how do they get them to the recycler, and all those things became another part of their process that they really had to manage. And at the end of the day, they were sort of both sitting there looking at each other going, we don't know if this adds value really. And certainly it's hard to explain to the customer that there's going to be a cost associated with this because recycling isn't free. There is a cost, particularly right now. And, where are we going to go with this? How do we make this just another part of our process, just another part of our system. And how do we drive the cost down so that we're not being a unique retailer who has an inflated cost, because we're also incorporating the cost of recycling into our projects. So yeah, it was a really interesting, practical, story around actually someone trying to do this in their business on a day-to-day level. Because
we know that the avalanche is coming. If we're installing, let's call it 3 gigawatts per year in Australia, just looking at, the smaller scale stuff, that's adding up and it's growing. And the net zero report, which came out this week, said that for us to achieve net zero by 2030 would require 3 terawatts of wind and solar projects. So we know that there's about 30 gigawatts deployed in Australia of solar so far, and that number is going to grow and grow. And it's an absolute fact that panels come to end of life. Now, some of them come to end of life sooner than others, but at some point they're going to come there. We thought it would be a great idea to bring on Anthony Vippond from Lotus Energy. Anthony's the CEO and a co-founder of it. One of the in-demand guys. I put the shout out to find someone who knows about recycling and the issues around stewardship and the technology. Thank you to everyone who reached out. I got quite a few responses, and your name kept coming up. So welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, guys. Great to join you.
And just to bring the listeners up to speed as well, how did you end up in recycling and the position you're in now?
I'll give you the short version is doing solar for 31 years now. We went to recycle ourselves. So we own a lot of C&I rooftop solar and under PPAs, a few solar farms, and we pressed a particular company who I think I'll probably raise shortly in this discussion about recycling for us. And I was querying around what transpires, what actually happens, do we get a certificate of recycling, how much is recovered? And after a fair bit of due diligence, we discovered that actually there was no recycling available. So we felt, we'd been successful in the renewable energy industry, and we felt it was partly our responsibility to take some action and invest in it.
So that brings an interesting question. How much of a panel can be recycled and what's the process of it?
At the moment for us, we can recover 97%. And I stress this point, and it's important for everyone to hear it, is that if someone's telling you they're recycling, please visit their recycling facility. Don't take it for granted that they've got a pretty animated video or, great statements or a very nice website, or maybe even other recognized brands are utilizing their service. Please do your due diligence. Backtracking onto your question, that 97%. So at the moment, we recover everything other than the backing sheet, the cable sheath, and the junction box, which is essentially plastics. We've finalised the trial utilising some industrial microwaves with Wollongong University, and I watched with interest some of Macquarie Uni's statements around microwaves as well. But we've got a new machine coming at the moment, which will mean that we can recover 100%.
I mean, that would be world leading, yeah? I've done some cursory reading that states 96, 97%.
Yep.
Now, the material that comes out the other end, how much value is in it?
This is the catch, of course. At the moment, we need to charge a gate fee for recycling. It's not like accepting copper cable, where, of course, we're going to pay dollars for receiving that because there's intrinsic value in the copper that far exceeds the processing cost. At the moment, we're charging about $10 per solar panel for the recycling, assuming that they've still got the aluminium frame and the cables and everything attached. The glass being the biggest challenge out of all of it at the moment, and making up a very large percentage of the solar panel. We've now got products being made that are timber look sleepers. We've got corporate bench tops. It's getting tested for a rendering product at the moment. We've also got sandbags being tested. And I should mention, Nigel mentioned earlier when we were chatting pre this discussion, I was at a SEER conference last year in Ballarat, and someone in the audience suggested we should make tiles for behind the batteries. It would be a great sort of circular economy story. We've just had that completed in terms of finalisation for testing and everything. Those tiles are about to be stocked at Lawrence and Hanson as an end-of-life product.
So, Anthony, can you give us a bit more detail? What does the glass look like when it comes out the other end? Is it sand or, well, we've got no idea.
It doesn't come out like sand. The grade is actually like incredibly fine. It's like around 25 microns. What that means is if you think of like talcum powder and you rub it in your fingers, you can literally see it in your fingerprint. So 25 microns is like incredibly tiny and quite literal to this point. You can pick it up and rub it in your hands and it will not cut you because it's down to a powder.
And how do you separate that out from there to different components? Because aren't there other more valuable,
silver, lead,
smaller metals, silver, lead, so forth? How do you get them out?
At the moment, so our process is a mechanical process. We use like mechanical destruction. So I can happily chat through the stage-by-stage process. So it basically shreds it up, goes up a conveyor. There's a big misting system to keep all the dust suppression and everything down. We have a dust extraction system. It then goes into what's called a hammer mill. It's basically a mining piece of equipment, and it will pulverize the solar panel into basically break it down into like finite pieces. The front end, we cut the cables off. So we've got a separate cable processing line that does 2 ton of cable per hour. And then mechanically, that's the only thing we have to do as in, let's say, humans touching the solar panel. Once it pulverizes, it drops through a grid and it literally moves the material. So it sucks the material using pneumatic air and it goes into what's called a cyclone and zigzag. And at that point, the heavier material drops out, which is actually the aluminium frame. And so the aluminium frame comes out like little beads, like if you imagine like the old slug gun pellets for the older listeners who were perhaps, pre-gun laws, that they had like little aluminium pellets. And then it sucks the lighter material across again, and it goes into some big sieves, and agitator tables that we've got that then separate the balance of the material. So it takes out the plastics, like the EVA backing sheet and everything. We still have silver in that powdered glass. So there's 88 parts per million, so about 88 grams per ton of silver sitting in that. And we know how to get it out. So people, of course, saying, well, why aren't you doing that? Our objective was to create a great process that could process a reasonable amount of panels per hour. We can process up to 200 panels per hour. We can get the silver out. However, we have to use chemicals to do it. So we're running various tests at the moment of how to separate that, avoiding the use of chemicals and water. So as it stands...
So it's possible. It's being done, but it's not really viable to do it because the additional cost and the chemicals and everything else.
And being a renewable energy business, we don't want to have residual chemicals.
Got to jump in there, Anthony. If I was a mining company and you told me that you had 88 grams a ton, I'm talking to you. I'm pretty keen because I can't get it out of the ground at that, surely.
Well, hopefully one of them's listening that's got a great idea. We're looking at something without giving away some IP of trialing a centrifuge to get them out. But we know we can do it with hydrochloric acid and acetone right now, basically nail polish remover.
Okay, you guys have, I know you guys have been working on this for a long time. You've clearly invested an awful lot of money and a lot of time, and you're hoping to get somewhere in the end which gives you, a viable process. You maybe, I'm guessing, assuming that you're going to have one of the lowest costs and get to a point where there's maybe no cost, which is what we all need, or very, very little cost, so that the wheels just start turning then and it becomes a viable industry. Putting aside all the mechanics and the challenges, and good on you for leading the way, mate. It's full credit to you for, taking that plunge. How far away are we from that?
It's a bit of an unknown, Nigel. I'd love to give you a direct answer. I hate giving vague answers.
We're all about vague, mate. We're not going to hold you to it. No one's listening.
What we've done with the microwaves and recovering some of the material, albeit it's only 3%, we've also got the cable processing line, and our line is actually multi-purpose. So we can take e-waste, so inverters and optimizers and metering equipment and switchgear, etc. So we've focused on the renewable industry energy. Sure, we can take a PC or a tablet or whatever as well. That will improve the profitability. once we hit that point and get that machine up and running? The easy answer is a product stewardship scheme, to say that will trigger it, because then there's a levy of some description.
Is a levy something that you guys would lobby for? If you were sitting down with the Prime Minister having dinner and saying, look, we really want to solve this problem, we've invested millions of dollars already, we need a levy, would you ask for that? And what do you think that levy is right now?
The answer is yes, of course. Biasly, who in business wouldn't ask for more money and support? The way we see it is that the levy would incorporate something that's placed as a customs duty and quite potentially as a cents per watt. Like I've heard all sorts of, weird and wonderful ideas of getting manufacturers to kick in money now and top up a fund, etc. The truth is the volume of solar panels being imported into Australia is exponentially bigger than what is being recycled at the moment. Because when we started from, in the early 90s is the reality of when it really sort of started at any level. But in the early 2000s, when it picked up and really didn't sort of J-curve or hockey stick until sort of around 06 to 08, if we introduced the levy today, that levy could service those old solar panels quite easily. How would that look? I think it's around 5 cents a watt, and that would cover the entire industry.
Would that cover logistics as well? Because you're speaking from a processing point of view.
Yeah.
So has there been some modelling done on what it looks like for the logistics? Because some of the, let's say, solar farms that come to end of life, they might be in regional Queensland or back blocks WA, and they're obviously going to have a much higher logistics cost plus a labour cost to remove them and bring them in. So has that all been modelled, and how accurate do you think it is?
Great question, Luke. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and it's a lot easier said than done. There's quite a few reverse logistics opportunities. And, I would argue more so with the big wholesalers than councils. We're not talking about recycling, your old printer or, a piece of e-waste that you can throw in the boot of your car. This is, you can drop at Officeworks or some of these places where there's depots. An old solar system can weigh, 500 kilos to a ton quite comfortably. And, the average person isn't dropping that in the boot of their car. This is very back of napkin sort of, throwaway line saying 5 cents per watt. At the moment, we're taking solar panels from all over Australia. And there's certain companies, respect to those brands, that are happy to pay because they want it professionally managed. For instance, I have no interest in any of the brands other than I use some of them for our own installations, but Q-Cells are paying for solar panels to be coming from northern Queensland to us, and stuff coming from WA and everything. It's a very, very expensive cost when you start talking that sort of logistics. Ideally, at 5 cents a watt, we need to see recycling plants sitting in all the major metro areas in Australia, plus regional, major regional. And when I talk major regional, I'm perhaps more so referencing major renewable energy zones, like Dubbo.
Anthony, I just ran the numbers in Google. That 88 grams that you get out of every ton in silver is worth $100, and a ton worth of panel scrap has got to be around 50 panels. So theoretically, there's a couple of dollars worth of silver in every panel.
Yes.
I just can't help but think that there's a mining company that wants to meet you.
Yeah. Oh, I hope so. Hopefully they're listening, Karl.
It's $1,200. It's $1,200 a ton for silver at the moment. Yep. Just Google it, and at $1,200 a ton. If you look at something like Kalgoorlie, they're getting a golf ball worth of gold out of each one of those enormous haul pack trucks that they're driving up the side of the mine for an hour to get it out. So there's got to be a miner that's interested in mining your silver.
A good question, just leading off some of the things you've been saying, is that ESG requirements of the corporate world are becoming more stringent, and they're requiring a bit more evidence. A good example is the modern slavery stuff, where they want to see some sort of independent certification around that. No doubt it's going to get the same with the recycling. So if their requirements are that it's full life cycle responsibility, and you've built that cost into the project that you're doing for them, they're going to want to see that the recycling is actually taking place. We're not talking aluminium recycling with landfill. We're talking actual recycling, yeah?
Absolutely. And this one I call the pub test, Luke, is that, if I said to you, I'm sitting at the pub having a beer with you and I say, I recycle solar panels, I cut the lead off the back. As most of the listeners will be familiar with the male and female, let's just call them MC4 connectors in the end, and I just use a pair of side cutters and I cut that off. I recycle solar panels. I think the average person wouldn't take you seriously. However, the definition of recycling, there's no percentage measurement. This is where some other layers come in around, one, what do we expect as an industry? Do we expect 100% recycling, 95, 90? What is that number? And let's create those benchmarks and have something that's seriously recognised for its standards and recovery and everything. Because at the moment, our biggest challenge, and I'm saying this as Lotus and the other companies out there that are, working on different things, because my understanding is at the moment we're actually the only recycler that's actually fully operational, is that everybody that's taking this seriously would like to see some standards of recovery.
I'm impressed already, Anthony. I thought when you were recycling the glass that we were turning it into road base, which is what most glass recycling looks like. And obviously those particles are much bigger and you wouldn't have any chance of being able to recover any of the metals if it was like that. So it totally opened my eyes. I didn't know anyone was pulverizing stuff into dust. And totally opened my eyes as to what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Karl. Look, it creates its own challenges as well, pulverizing it into a dust and everything. And we're working on the recovery of those metals and using, not big surprise perhaps to people that are familiar with this sort of industry of, electrostatic machines and everything to recover some of the non-ferrous metals that are left. And, can we do things better? Absolutely. We're not resting on our laurels. We're not saying we're perfect, but we're saying it's a really good start.
Yeah, look, I totally understand the chemical side of the process. I had a bit to do with the chemical clean line at Boeing in Fisherman's Bend, and a bit to do with the EPA around that. And the catchphrase is, if you must pollute, dilute. So we had to send stuff down the drain, and the only way that you send it down the drain is with hundreds of thousands of litres of water. So I totally appreciate that the chemical extraction process is very difficult to do in Australia, and hence why it's obviously a struggle. But I'm sure there's a miner that can figure it out.
No doubt.
Now, one other solution that we've discussed previously is repurposing panels that are still working and still potentially have a decade or two or more left in them. Surely that's got to be factored in when we're talking about recycling solar farms, recycling en masse, the gigawatts that are going to come to end of life or end of useful purpose. So do you have any thoughts on how we could do that?
Absolutely. Because I started my working life as a sparky. I still like to consider myself an electrician. I maintain my licenses and everything. The obvious thing is to say, well, where's our test and tag procedure? What is it? How does that look? And what's deemed acceptable, around locally in Australia and then also internationally, because there's some things that prohibit solar being reused and repurposed in Australia, being the solar credit, the STC, LGC.
Well, just the AS5033. So some of the panels might be working, they might be safe.
And you've got your Class C. Sorry, Luke. You're okay?
I was waving because Thornton was in the backhand in Nigel beer.
Oh,
so I wasn't waving at you. Sorry, mate. Please continue.
The Class C, the fire rating aspects, insurance. Do insurers accept it? As CEC accredited installers, are you comfortable signing off on utilisation? There's a number of hurdles. An easy one for us and a low resistance point is creating some benchmark standards for the solar panels that could potentially be exported to Pacific Islands, to which a lot are going to Africa at the moment, which scares me for different reasons, and to India. But we definitely, again, we need some standards.
Someone like you on the front line, Anthony, you're in a position that you would quite easily be able to implement some kind of second life stuff. If it was directed in your direction, you'd be able to say, all right, well, this panel's good, and put that in a pile if there was an opportunity.
Definitely. And we're trialing lots of different quirky things as well, around repurposing. How big the pull through will be for that, I suspect it's minor, in all honesty. And I'd love to see it getting reused. I'm not hung up on it all going into the recycling plant, because we have a recycling plant. The truth is the volume of waste that's coming through is exponentially larger than what everyone projected. We've, of course, done the research and read all the reports done by UTS and Equilibrium and everything, and people projected based on 15 to 25 years lifespan. But there's things like, of course, weather events that are causing things to fail sooner. I guess the pressure on manufacturers to lower their standards, and I mean that by the pressure of pushing down prices as cents per watt, because it's very much how it's sold in Australia. And also these PFIT and TFIT schemes, the inflated feed-in tariff schemes, is that they're all coming to their end now, between now and 2025. And of course, batteries and EVs. So people are upgrading systems. And of course, aesthetically, they don't want, these beautiful looking black trimmed panels sitting alongside their old BP solar aluminium frame looking different. It looks ugly on their roof. They don't want that either. They could,
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that, but I do agree. If anyone's got two JA 390s,
yep.
and to match the other panels, I reckon I can get them to fit. But no, I totally understand that. That makes perfect sense. And when you spell it out like that, other people can obviously understand that as well. And as you say, that waste stream hasn't really been considered. The nuts and bolts, so the operation of recycling, what does it look like? So a guy rolls up with a trailer of panels. Does it pick it up with a forklift and dump it into the machine? Or, how much labor is involved in doing this, Anthony? Is it scalable?
Absolutely scalable. We've just acquired another site where we're going to expand. This is in Melbourne, and we've also got a proposal for another site up in Dubbo, so in the renewable energy zone, where we could process around about 1,500 solar panels per hour. Per hour. Yeah.
That's 2 liquid containers for the layperson, yeah?
Yeah, it's very much automated. At the moment, we scan the barcodes and take photos of the backing sheets, because we're trying to create, a whole bunch of data around, if we're recycling a certain make and model of solar panel, then we take the glass away that's powdered and we get a spectrometer analysis. So we're looking at, are there any ferrous metals in there? We're looking for any nasties, of course, of heavy metals. But the mechanical process in reality is cut the cables off and that's it. Because we'll end up automating the scanning and imagery process. That part's not automated yet. So it's very quick. We literally move them up with a forklift up to the edge of the conveyor. They cut the leads off, scan and photo, and shift it onto the conveyor belt. And that's it. At that rate, with 2 people operating it, we can literally push through 100 to 200 panels per hour, at the first plant that we set up.
I think this is really interesting about, particularly your comments about, how the expectations about how much product was going to need to be recycled was so badly undercooked. And, my brother-in-law was looking at a house recently in the mid-north coast of New South Wales. And he rang me and said, listen, it's got a solar system on it. But the owner said, look, the solar system hasn't worked, but it's only the inverter. So, you can just get that fixed and fire the solar system up. And I said to him, well, mate, the reality is that with the way the standards are, you may not be able to do that, because you'll find that the entire system has to be brought up to spec, because Australian standards have changed and no electrician's going to want to sign it off. So even though you can get an inverter for $500, you're probably going to end up ripping that whole system off. And lo and behold becomes the issue that you're talking about. And there's not a day goes by that I don't hear someone, sadly, having to tear off a system which has probably got fully functional solar panels, purely because of the unintended consequences of standards trying to keep people safe. You know,
Yeah.
I just that just happens all the time. So I'm not surprised to hear that it's been undercooked, having seen what's going on out there. And you're quite right, mate. This is arguably a bigger problem than everyone projected, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just as an example, we're currently recycling for the Solar Schools Victoria program. And exactly what you're talking about, Nigel, that they decided to go and do a review and upgrade and spend more money and increase the scale of the systems installed in the schools. But of course, a lot of them came back that they're not to current standards, probably the vast majority. And so we're currently recycling around 900 systems from those schools across Victoria.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And we also, for all the listeners, apparently solar panels are pretty cool to import drugs in as well. So we've been recycling for Australian Border Force for the captured solar panels that have found extra goodies in them, and they come down to be recycled for us. Now, of course,
Now,
they
does the spectrometer pick up any of the other little things that are in there?
I was going to say, do you get to recycle the cocaine? Because, you know, I know plenty of people there.
Yeah, powder.
Yeah.
We're talking powder, right? Yeah.
It's far cheaper to recycle those solar panels, let's say. I should throw out a disclaimer there. We're doing the right thing, Australian Border Force, if you're listening. It's not necessarily exactly how perhaps we anticipated things to be occurring. When we first invested in this, we thought it would be a much slower process. We'd be doing a lot more in the e-waste space, but the demand for the recycling of the solar panels is huge. It's actually incredibly big. And so what we recycled last year is about 120% of the total projected waste for Victoria last year of solar panels. And clearly we didn't recycle 100%. I've got no doubt there's plenty sitting in people's backyards where the installers told them they'll be back in a few weeks to collect them, and they never did, because we hear this story a lot. And, you know, I've got no doubt, you know, some got sold on eBay and some got shipped offshore, and, you know, some are offered a mate's farm out in the country. And so, yeah, the problem's much bigger than we all anticipated.
Do you think we're going to get there? Are we going to be able to process all of the solar panel waste? Because we're seeing the tip of the iceberg, but with the amount of solar being installed, the capability to process many more gigawatts of panels needs to be there. We're going to get there.
I can only speak for ourselves of, you know, what our plans are. We will be fully operational by the end of next year, not this year, in New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia. We can see the demand for it, the need for it, and also, you know, the industry support. You know, the more professional installers are quite happy to ensure that the right thing happens, and also that corporate governance, that ESG part that you were mentioning earlier. It's all doable, but it's...
Think bigger, Anthony. WA's feed-in tariff, people come off that feed-in tariff in another 18 months. So maybe WA's got a massive market as well.
We were actually planning to be in WA before we were going to be in South Australia and Queensland. Probably a decent segue to say that I visited, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention names, but a competitive...
We're not the ABC, mate. You can say what you want.
Well, I'm not politically correct either, so I'm happy to...
Mate, I don't think I've heard a swear word, and there's normally a few drop by now, so it's perfectly fine, mate. You say it straight. You're welcome to.
Right, it's very unlike me anyhow, Luke, so you've given me free rein now, so here we go. I had made an appointment to go and meet the boss of Reclaim PV, fly over to Adelaide and discuss buying them out, you know, for whatever reason. We'd been told that they were basically winding up, and we made the appointment. We turn up there and the owner's a no-show. So as you can probably imagine, I'm pretty disgruntled. Paid for flights and for myself and one of our business partners to fly over and meet with Clive. The landlord building manager subsequently let us in to the building because he hasn't been paying his rent for a long time. And we'd heard all the wonderful things that Reclaim PV, after we'd published that we were 97% recovery. I think Solar Recovery Corporation a week later claimed that they were at 98% recovery. And as far as I know, they're not recycling at all either. But And then subsequently Reclaim PV came out and claimed that they were at 100%. I can tell you that the stuff that you've seen on, I think you guys have seen it on Crap Solar, posted there, I took those photos and videos. And so in Adelaide, there's about 160,000 solar panels dumped. The solar panels were being smashed off. The frame was being smashed off with a sledgehammer and the cables cut off. So what I would say is pluck the cherries, take the easy value material out of it. To me, it's
criminal.
It looks like we could do it much better, because I believe that I can't comment on the other company that you mentioned. I'm not familiar with them, and I think that that's really speculation without anything to back it up. But I know for a fact that Reclaim holds contracts with manufacturers and others to recycle their panels and to do something right. And there's a smoking gun here to say it's not being done right. So on the one hand, we can throw rocks at them and say they're doing the wrong thing. On the other hand, we can say we need to do a lot better than what we currently are, and really quickly.
Mate, absolutely. So between Adelaide and Brisbane, there's 260,000 solar panels sitting there. And some of, the one in Brisbane is sitting outside. So quite literally, we'd made an offer to buy up Reclaim, including the brand, the website, everything. I was told that Brisbane was all cleaned up, and I was up in Brisbane for the solar product stewardship scheme discussion with Smart Energy Council and EcoActive and Queensland Government. And I literally had a meeting less than a K away from Reclaim's old site. And I was meant to have a call back from the director of Reclaim about an offer like 3 days earlier. He's gone missing again. And so I decided I'll drop into the Brisbane site and go and check that, if what he said was true or not. And I turn up there and there's this incredibly large pile of solar panels sitting outside, a lot of thin film, and incredibly disappointing. And back to the pub test, it definitely didn't pass.
Well, that's potential heavy metals going into the groundwater.
100% it's happened. Like, it's not like they're whole panels. The vast majority are broken. The vast majority have the aluminium frame taken away. It's terrible for our industry. And, I stress to all the listeners, like, we don't want this story to be a bad story. Like, we want this to be a good story in that we as an industry care. We'll do something about it. It's not going to be another
opportunity there, is what you're getting at. There's an opportunity, Anthony. Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also a responsibility. We're meant to be a green industry. If we're throwing heavy metals into landfill and we're not managing our waste, that's terrible.
I think every solar company has trees equivalent or the CO2 offsets. And of course, we've got that from STCs in particular, that reference calculation. If we're not recycling our waste, then who should?
Now, a question for Nigel. You've had more to do with politics and obviously with solar insiders. And what does a stewardship program or a levy look like in practice, Nigel?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I was actually thinking the same thing, and maybe we'll ask Anthony this, but, it seems to me that someone practical on the ground who's actually rocking and rolling and has got machines rolling is the perfect person to be bashing the hell out of the people on the stewardship committee who seem to have got nowhere down in Canberra. But of course, the reality of this is that, and I'd maybe counsel you on this, Anthony, is one of the challenges that you're going to face, I'm sure, is just like the challenges that we faced at BP back in the day when we were only the single manufacturer in Australia. We couldn't get government support. It was extraordinarily hard because they said, well, we can't just support one company, right? That looks like we're favouring someone, and show us someone else who's doing it, then we'll give you support. And there was no one else, so we couldn't get support. And so the reality is probably until someone else actually does this legitimately and properly, it's going to be hard for Anthony to get support politically, even though the stewardship committee might be willing to do so and might want to push it. And even though, the government might be sympathetic to it, we're going to need to jump over that political hurdle first of finding a way so that it doesn't look like they're favouring someone.
I completely agree, mate. Like any state, federal, even local government, they look for their competitive bids, and otherwise it just looks like a bias.
If I may jump in, Anthony, you mentioned there's 250,000 panels out there. I just did some back of the envelope. that is a week worth of panels that are getting installed in the Australian market right now. So, you said that there was a hockey stick sort of scenario going on. That's a week worth of panels that are getting installed. So obviously at some point down the line, you're going to be pretty busy.
Absolutely, mate. We've done the math, and it's definitely got a big future. And unfortunately, the BP solar panels or fortunately, I should say, for the industry, those early stage ones were actually brilliant solar panels, so are incredibly well made. For your reference, Nigel, we do test a whole heap of them, and when they come in, we already know they're working. Like, people are only removing those because they're upgrading systems and they're taking it away for that reason. Yeah, but Karl, mate, you're 100% right. The volume is insane, and if we look at that Dubbo region, I know because this data is fresh in my head, they're currently installing 3 gigawatts in that zone, and
Ooh.
the damaged stock from installation is, we get varying numbers, but 3 to 5%. So let's call it. Yeah,
That's
I know.
Terrible.
I'm with you. Don't worry. I wouldn't be happy if it was my job, but these are the numbers that we're getting.
Should be less than 1%.
I completely agree, mate. But let's say the guys driving the Manitels and around the sites and everything, perhaps they're a little bit rough, and
Wow.
they're not passing.
That's costing real money. I mean, 3 gigawatts, 5% loss. That's hectic. That's a shitload of money for the average listener. 3 gigawatts is the whole domestic market rooftop PV.
There's not time for much more, so I'm just going to throw it down to these other guys and see if they've got any last questions or comments to make. Karl?
All I've got to say is I've been meaning to come out and see Anthony at the facility for the last 5 years. So I guess now that we've got him on the show, I haven't got any more excuses.
Yep.
So after the show, I'll definitely be hitting up Anthony so I can bask in this incredible operation that's absolutely inspiring. And I'll sign off at the end of the episode, as my part of the end of the episode now, saying it's just another one of the great episodes where we've had someone that's completely blown my mind as to what's going on. And that's why we keep doing the podcast, because people like you, Anthony, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Karl. And of course, you're welcome to come and visit, mate, and kick the tyres and see it firsthand.
Very good. Awesome. And Nigel?
Yeah, I'd just say Anthony check his pockets for silver when he's walking out, because he's done the numbers. No, I just want to say actually that I'm on the road for weeks and weeks and weeks. We got Smart Energy Council coming up in 2 weeks. We got another Solar Cutters event next week. The content that's being delivered is just next level. The CPD points if you need them, which is a great thing, and look forward to seeing everyone on the road and keep on batting.
All right, Anthony, it's been great to have you on board. Any quick sign-off before you go?
Just maybe on the back of what Nigel was just saying, I'm speaking at the SEA Victoria conference at the end of May. There's CPD points again, and Deakin Uni are talking there about the nanosilicon. I could talk a lot about the research stuff as well that we've been working with the various universities, but I encourage everyone that if they're looking to recycle, make sure you do your due diligence and ensure that, I guess, what's getting purported is actually happening, and support our industry and make sure the right thing occurs.
Well,
Absolutely.
We all know what happens when the right thing doesn't occur, and obviously Coles and Woolworths have both been fully ripped over the coals for Coles, Woolworths, different set of coals. For the fact that they've got warehouses full of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of soft plastics that weren't getting recycled. So their day will come, Anthony.
The likes of a Sky News would just love this, an Alan Jones or something, to be banging the drum of, see, solar is not recyclable and it's not environmentally friendly. And so we don't need negative stuff for our industry. We want to see positive stuff occurring and, and managing it professionally.
Yeah, we got to get you on the front page. We got to get you on Sky. We got to get you on those places, mate, so that the rest of the world can see that you're actually up and running and doing it, mate. Yeah, all power to you.
Thank you.
One last thing, Luke. On the news last night, 60% of cars sold in Australia last month were battery electric vehicles, not hybrids, battery electric vehicles. So last month, the Australian consumers bought 50,000 EVs, which is absolutely nuts because there weren't 50,000 EVs on the road in total up until the month before that, which is
That's
crazy.
insane, man. And
Wow.
I would have been aware of
fantastic.
that, but I live in WA and we've been obsessed with a solar eclipse for the last week. So
Oh,
I didn't get that news.
Yeah.
My quick sign off is that Mark Stevens from SolarGain shared a really cool graph which showed the monitoring of a system during the eclipse, and it went down in a neat line, and there was no cloud over here yesterday, and then it went up in the neat line, and then Scott from Geraldton posted one. So Mark's had gone down 70% of production to 30%. Scott's in Geraldton had gone down 80%. And I'd love to see one from Exmouth, but it was just a perfect, neat line. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that we hadn't mentioned that either, mate, because that is quite profound, right? The AEMO came out and said that there was more than a gigawatt of energy that was going to go offline as a consequence of that, and they had their contingencies in place. They were happy that it was going to work. And for all the naysayers out there, and I'm talking to you, Barnaby and Angus, and all the other Luddite knobheads that are out there that think that solar doesn't work and that all these kinds of issues are going to cause problems, we managed it. We got through it. The AEMO was all over it, and it showed that even when solar drops in these profound with these profound drops of energy, with a balanced, smart network, we can manage it just fine.
Absolutely. So Barnaby, technology works. The smarts are there.
And here in Melbourne, we also had a solar eclipse caused by cloud, and my 25 kilowatt system made a whopping 29 kilowatt hours for the day, which is absolutely shit.
First world problems, as they say, Karl. So anyway, Anthony Vippond from Lotus Energy, it's been really good. I've learned a heap, and it's great for people to hear what you're up to. You know, this is an issue for all of us to solve and for all of us to be involved in. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Luke, Karl, Nigel. Great to chat, guys. Cheers.
Awesome.
And thanks to you for listening as well. We appreciate your continued support. Thanks again.